So the shir today will be about Eruv Tavshilin, but specifically Eruv Tavshilin and COVID-19. What does one have to do with the other? Well, in a moment we will see. So you're all familiar with the minhag of Eruv Tavshilin. Pesach, you had Eruv Tavshilin, we did not, because the first day Yom Tov was Thursday. So in Chutz La'aretz was Thursday, Friday, Yom Tov, and Shabbos, you made Eruv Tavshilin. Shavuos, we all make Eruv Tavshilin because Shavuos is Friday. So let us just explain what is Eruv Tavshilin about, and then we will all understand the problem of Eruv Tavshilin during the Corona crisis. So there are two sugyas. The combination of the two explain what Eruv Tavshilin is. One is in Beitzet Tezvav or Mit Beis, and the other is in Psochim Memvav. So in Beitzet Tezvav, Chazal teach us the takon of Eruv Tavshilin. When Yom Tov falls Erev Shabbos, you cannot cook or do any other malacha from Yom Tov Shabbos, only if you put an Erev Yom Tov. So you need to take Tavshil and Pas and designate them and say this is an Erev, and by means of putting this Erev aside, we will be able, it would be permissible to cook or bake or other things from Shabbos, from Yom Tov to Shabbos. And there's a machlokes in the Gemara whether Eruv Tavshilin essentially is about Kvod Shabbos or Kvod Yom Tov. According to one opinion, the essence of Eruv Tavshilin is people should say Ein Yom Tov Meichen LeShabbos, Kal V'chomish Ein Yom Tov Meichen L'chol. If you cannot do a malacha on Yom Tov for Shabbos, goes without saying it's a Kal V'chomish. You can't do a malacha from Yom Tov for a weekday. And the other says Kedei sheyivror moni yofa Yom Tov and moni yofa LeShabbos. Chazal were afraid that person will cook and bake from Erev Yom Tov for Yom Tov and Shabbos, then most of the good stuff he will consume. He and his family will eat all the goodies and the best part of the food on Yom Tov, and there won't be enough left for Kvod Shabbos. And that is the essence and the reasoning, the rationale why Chazal were metaken Eruv Tavshilin. But everybody agrees that Eruv Tavshilin is at Konas Chachamim. And there rises the huge question, if we're dealing with an Issa Dioraisa, how could at Konas Chachamim be matir an Issa Dioraisa? One of the most fundamental principles in Shas is Ein koyach biyad chachomim la keduva ben haTorah bekum va'asei. So Chazal have no power to be matir what would be an Issa Dioraisa. So it goes without saying, we must assume that we're not dealing with an Issa Dioraisa, merely with an Issa Darabanan. The question is why? And the answer to that question is not in Beitzet Tezvav, but rather in Psochim Memvav. And in Psochim Memvav we have machlokes Rabbe and Rav Chisda. What is the fundament of Eruv Tavshilin? What is the basic? Why are we not dealing with an Issa Dioraisa? Why are we dealing with an Issa Darabanan? And bearing in mind that we're dealing with an Issa Darabanan, Yesh koyach biyad chachamim, hem amru vehem amru. So why is it not an Issa Dioraisa? Rabbi says, Hoyal ve'imiklalei orchim chazialei. Rabbi says, yes, the person is cooking, he's baking Yom Tov, L'tzorech Shabbos. But theoretically, there's a possibility that guests might arrive. And if guests do arrive, then obviously he will take the food that was prepared for Shabbos, and he will use at least some of it for his guests. And therefore, it is defined as oichel nefesh. Ach asher ya'ochel achol nefesh hu levad yoseh lachem. So even though his intentions were to cook and bake for Shabbos, not for Yom Tov, but as long as, in theory, there's a possibility that he will eat that food on Yom Tov, it still is defined as oichel nefesh lebo b'yom. Rav Chisda disagrees. And Tosfos explains the machlokes Rav Chisda and Rabba is azlina bosa machshava or bosa ma'aseh. What defines oichel nefesh? Is it the intention of the person, or is it the reality? According to Rav Chisda, It's the kavona, the intention. And if you had in mind to cook for Shabbos and not for Yom Tov, it's not Reichel Nefesh. According to Rabbi, it's the reality. It's the possibility. According to Rabbi, even a oifa mi Yom Tov lechayol is not an issa diuraisa. If a person cooks for Yom Tov and he intends to consume that food on a weekday, einoi loika, because if guests will arrive, he will use that food on Yom Tov, and therefore it is Zoichel Nefesh. So according to Rav Chizda, what would be the basis of Eruv Tavshilin? According to Rabbi, simple. We're not dealing with an Issa D'Oraisa, because as long as Orchem might come, and he might use that food for the guests that will just suddenly pop up, then it's still a Zoichel Nefesh. So it's not an Issa D'Oraisa. And if it's an Issa Rabbanon, that is where Eruv Tavshilin comes into the picture. But according to Rav Chizda, if he doesn't agree with the basic svara of oil, then what is the basis of Eruv Tavshilin? Rav Chizda maintains Tzorchi Shabbos Nasan B'Yom Tov. Because Kedushas Shabbos is greater than Kedushas Yom Tov, then Menatayra one is entitled to cook or bake Shabbos L'Tzorech Yom Tov. Tzorchi Shabbos Nasan B'Yom Tov. So it's only in Isda Rabbanon, and therefore Eruv Tavshilin would be valid. So we have two fundamental explanations. What is the basis of Eruv Tavshilin, and why ain't we dealing with an Issa D'Oraisa? According to Rav Chizda, Tzorchi Shabbos Nasan B'Yom Tov. According to Rabba, Hoyol v'Miklal Yorchem. Toysis explains both in Beitza, Daf Beis, and both in Psochim, Daf Mem Vav, that the nafkamina between the two approaches would be, could you cook or bake Yom Tov late afternoon when it's mamish a few moments before Beis Moshes? According to Rav Chizda, why not? Why not? What's the difference whether it's early in the morning or late in the afternoon? Tzorcha Shabbos Nasan B'Yom Tov. It's only is the Rabbanon. So Eruv Tavshilin works. But according to Rav Chazda, that the Rabbi, that the entire heter of Eruv Tavshilin is based on the possibility that guests will arrive. So it's late in the afternoon, and it's totally unfeasible, or at least unreasonable, that guests will arrive and you'll give them from the food that you cooked for Shabbos. Then Eruv Tavshilin would not be relevant. It wouldn't work. And the Magen Avraham quotes Taisa Simen Tov Kuf Chav Zayin and Shechanoch. Tov Kuf Chav Zayin Hilchas Yom Tov is the siman in which all the halachas of Eruv Tavshilin are to be found. So the Magen Avraham quotes the Taisus. Is the halacha kerabba or kerav Chizda? That's a major discussion in the Rishonim. The Rif and the Rosh both paskin in accordance to Rabba. And in their understanding, the basis of Eruv Tavshilin is the svara, hoyol ve'i mikleulei orchim chazielei. Rabbeinu Zerachia Halevi, the great Baal Plukta of the Alfasi, the Sefer Amor, disagrees, and he says, halacha kerav Chizda. In the opinion of the Rambam, there's a machloikis. In Shittas HaToises, there's a machloikis. But it is clear that there are two different opinions amongst the great Rishonim, halacha kerabba or halacha kerav Chizda. And the nafkamina would be, could you cook or bake Yom Tov late in the afternoon, l'koved Shabbos? According to Rav Chizda, yes. According to Rabbi, no. According to the Baal Amor, yes. According to the Rif and the Rosh, no. And this is where coronavirus, COVID-19, comes into the picture. So, in these days, when you cannot invite guests, and guests cannot come. So I know that even in America, the regulations have been somewhat eased, but I don't know whether it's legitimate to have guests coming over in the afternoon. Pesach, both in America and in Eretz Yisrael, it was totally out of the question. It was prohibited by law. So in Eretz Yisrael, by now, we could invite over family. I don't know what the situation is in Europe or in America. But the big question is, when it is totally infeasible or extremely unreasonable that guests might arrive, would Eruv Tavshilin still be valid? And the entire Eruv Tavshilin would be up in the air. It would be in question. Because if Eruv Tavshilin is based on Svoras Rabbah, and I think that is the opinion of most poskim, of most Rishonim, then could we still say Hoyel v'Mikla leYorchim in days like these, in the midst of a pandemic in which it is not only unreasonable, but it's against the law to have guests come over to your home? So, what is the minhag? I don't think we could talk about a minhag, because this is a situation that we never knew before. Definitely not during our lifetime, and I doubt ever before. So we are familiar with magefis, with pandemics. Cholera's outbreaks were quite common. And between Tov Kuf and Tov Reish Nun, in the span of 150 years, I know at least about 10 different times that the Poiskim, the Achronim, deal with different outbreaks of cholera and probably other pandemics as well. But we're not aware exactly whether there were government regulations. We have no minhag. I'm not aware of any early source that deals with this question. So maybe they didn't rely on Eruv Tavshilin. How would we know? I don't think anybody dealt with this question before, but it seems to be an extremely relevant question. Could we rely on Eruv Tavshilin when it's virtually impossible to have guests over, if Eruv Tavshilin is based on the Svora of Rabbah, Hoyel v'Mikla leYorchim Chaz Yalei? So I want to say 3 reasons why, yes, Eruv Tavshilin would still be valid. Number 1, the Mishnah Berurah paskins, Tov Kuf Chav Zayin, that b'Shas Adchak we could rely on Rav Chizda Tzorcha Shabbos Nasan B'Yom Tov. B'Shas Adchak we rely on the Balamor and some other Rishonim, that the basis of Eruv Tavshilin is not the Svor of Rabbah Hoyel v'Mikla leYorchim, but rather Tzorcha Shabbos Nasan B'Yom Tov, and therefore doesn't matter if guests will come, could come, should come, has nothing to do with the guests. And b'Shas Adchak we are soimach. The problem with this approach is, why is it a Shas Adchak? It's less Shas Adchak today than it ever was before. We have refrigeration. We could assume that in days of yore, Eruv Tavshilin was totally essential. They had no refrigeration. And especially if you had 2 days Yom Tov in Chutz La'aretz, preparing Erev Yom Tov to have a day after tomorrow food for Shabbos, probably they would have no food for Shabbos, bearing in mind that Yom Tov and Shabbos you eat chamin, you eat cooked food. So if we're dealing with Shas Adchak, well, in our modern day and age, it's less Shas Adchak than it ever was in the past. So yes, the Mishnah Berurah does pass on Shas Adchak we rely on Rav Chizda, but it's a Sveika D'Oraisa at the end of the day. And why wouldn't we be machmer? And therefore, I suggest approach number 2. I won't be happy with approach number 2 either till I will suggest approach number 3. But 2 comes before 3. Approach number 2 brings to mind the question, what does Tosfos mean when Tosfos says, late in the afternoon, samach l'shkiyas achama, we could no longer rely on Hoyel? Is it because it's not reasonable that guests will show up and we will to offer them food, or because it's impossible? And as long as there is a theoretical possibility, even though it's extremely unlikely, Rabbah still would say, Hoyel v'Mikla leYorchim Chaz Yalei, and it would be defined as Oichel Nefesh. I think it depends on the Lashonis and Tosfos. So in Beitza, Daf Chof Aleph, Beitza Daf Beis, Psochem Mem Vav, we find 3 different Tosfos in dealing with this issue. Psochem Mem Vav, Tosfos says, if it's Somach Lebein HaShmoshos, Kiven de lo shachiach klal lo amrin en Hoyel. This lotion seems to indicate it does depend on reasonability. Lo shachiach klal. It's not common at all. So it depends, is it common or not, that orchim might arrive, that guests might arrive. So the lesson of this thesis seems to prove it does depend on reasonability. Is it reasonable to assume that guests might arrive? So during the corona crisis, yes, it's totally unreasonable. However, the lesson of Tosfos in Beitza is Shafilu Yavo Orchim Ein Shohus B'Yoyim. There's not enough time in the day. And I think this lesson would seem to indicate, even if Orchim will come, you don't have enough time to offer them the food that you cooked on Yom Tov. Tosfos doesn't say, in the last 5 minutes, it's not reasonable that Orchim will come. Tosfos doesn't say, even if they will come, it's not reasonable that you have enough time to give them food. So this loshon, afilu yavo, ein shohus b'yoyim la'ochla, there's not enough time to eat, seems to indicate does not depend on reasonability, but rather on the possibility. Is it possible or not? I think that's a machloikes maram and marshal and beitza dav beizum and beiz. Tosfos writes, Lididan ein lismoch al ho'il. Tosfos does not explain why not. Maram says, because we paskin in accordance to Rav Chizda, not Rabbah. The Mashal says, no, halachic Rabbah. Ledidan ein lismach ahoyel, because lo shachiche orchim. In our times, it's not reasonable to expect that guests will arrive Shabbos in the afternoon and you will have to feed them. The Pri Megadim clearly maintains it does not depend on reasonability, but rather is it a theoretical possibility at all. And I'm aware of the Pri Megadim at least 3 sources. The Psicha to Hilchas Shabbos in Reish Nun Vav, and once again Reish Nun Tes. I think it's in Hilchas Yom Tov as well, but the sources I remember are in Hilchas Shabbos. So this seems to be a matter of disagreement between the Achronim, and I pointed out L'shoinus of Tosfos L'kan U'Lachan. So according to the Mashal, it depends on reasonability. According to the Pri Megadim, it depends on possibility. So according to the Pri Megadim, and some sources that I quoted, even though it's totally unreasonable, but it's possible. It's possible somebody just might knock on the door and be in your house, and you'll ask him, how did you get here? I don't know what he'll say. I broke the law, but I'm here. And if he's here, you'll try to give him whatever you have. So would this be the reason I would be makel? Well, tzorach you. There are l'shoinus kan lakan, and once again we're dealing with a chashash d'oraisa. So maybe I would say it's a svek sveka. According to the Pri Megadim, it depends on possibility. The Mishnah Berurah says we could rely on the opinions that halachic Rav Chizda, tzorach Shabbos nasan b'yom tov. So the combination of approach number 1 and approach number 2 gives us a svek sveka, and it gives us more room for leniency. Yes, it is reasonable to argue so. But this brings me to approach number 3. And my basic comment is that even before the corona outbreak, how reasonable is it that guests will arrive Yom Tov in the afternoon and you will offer them Macholei Shabbos and Yom Tov? I got married quite a while ago, 46 years, of which 44 years I was together with my wife, Zechroina Levrocha, passed away 2 years ago, as you know. And I do not remember or recall even once that guests arrived Shabbos in the afternoon and we gave them chont or meat and fish. Many times guests came, sometimes expected, sometimes unexpected, and we gave them some pears, some fruit, some nuts, some popcorn, whatever we had in the house. But we're living in an age of abundance. It's extremely uncommon that hungry people will knock on your door Shabbos afternoon that didn't eat Suda Shabbos. I think that I do recall once, for many years we lived in Kiryat San Natanya next to the Laniaro Hospital, so I think once it happened that a person knocked on the door and he said he arrived in the middle of the night with his wife to have a baby, and till right now, she was waiting outside the door for his wife to have a baby, and he was told, Mazel Tov, B'shot Tov HaMetzlach, as the baby was born. He said Mazel Tov to his wife, and now he's looking for Suda Shabbos. So yes, well, if you live right next door to a hospital and you have many friends, it could happen. But besides that one incident, I do not recall ever that hungry guests appeared Shabbos afternoon. So we live in an age of plenty. And every person, even though he's not rich, he's not affluent, but he has enough for Suda Shabbos. So from where would a guest suddenly show up and knock on your door and you will offer him the food that you cooked Yom Tov for Shabbos? It's even more uncommon when Yom Tov is Erev Shabbos and everybody is busy at home. So who are the hungry guests that will knock on your door Yom Tov Erev Shabbos and say, we want some chont? That is totally unreasonable. So this question we're dealing with today, we should deal with by every Eruv Tavshilin, Lav Davka, in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis. So how do we deal? What's the answer on this question? My feeling is this. I know it's a chiddush, but I feel it very strongly. We're living in a changing world. And I assumed just a few moments ago, probably once upon a time, in days of yore, it was more common that a hungry guest knocked on your door. I just want to bring to mind the rush in the beginning of Perek Yud Mesechel Psachim, Perek Arv Psachim, at the very beginning of the Perek. Taisus brings the minig that they said Kiddush in Beis HaKnesses. And that is a very common minig up to this very day. Hasidim don't do it. I think Litvish don't do it. But most of the Yekisha shuls, the Ashkenazi shuls in America and Europe especially have this minig. So Leil Shabbos Beis HaKnesses, the Gabbai makes Kiddush and the kids drink from the wine. What is the source of this minig? And what is the origin and the rationale of this minig? So the Rosh quotes Rabbeinu Yoina. In days of yore, poor people stayed in shul and they had no meal. So at least they should be Yoitze Kiddush Diuraisa. So Rabbeinu Yoina says, but you need Kiddush B'mokum Suda. And they had no Suda. So Rabbeinu Yoina says, at least the Yoitze Kiddush Diuraisa. And it's shocking. So the poor people were in shul. Nobody invited them over to their house. They had no meal. And that is why they made Kiddush in shul. It was not Kiddush B'mokum Suda. So what defined the Jewish home was always Sechnos Esorchim. Yevomis Ayin Tes, the Gemara says, Shloisha Samonim. Yesh Bo Omezu, Rachmonim Beishonim Goyim Lechasudim. We learn from Avraham Avinu the virtue of Achnos Esorchim. So obviously, but people were poor. And most people couldn't afford it. It was a Suda She'eina Maspekas Lebaleo. Just come to think of it, many guests came together, they stayed in shul. So maybe they were given some crackers, some nuts, some apples, I don't know. Some veggies, vegetables, but it was not Kiddush B'mokum Suda. So in those days, I think it was common that a poor person that you did happen to know knocked on your door Shabbos afternoon and he begged, do you have any leftovers? Do you have some chont that left over, or a piece of meat, or a piece of fish? And yes, and you happily shared with him. So it was common, hoyel v'mikla liyorchem. But on the other hand, the world has changed in another way as well. And because we live in an age of abundance, and poor people won't be coming, knocking at your door to beg for a bit of chont or a piece of fish. But on the other hand, family members definitely would partake from the food you're cooking, L'chovit Shabbos Yom Tov in the afternoon. It's quite common. Toya Meyu Chayim Zachu. So the same people that eat some chunt and fish and flesh every Erev Shabbos in the afternoon will do the same on Yom Tov. So what's the problem? We no longer need to rely on Hoyel v'Mikla leYorchem. What about Bnei Abayis? And it's extremely common in our days, especially when the days are long, like they are now, and it's extremely common that the kids, little kids, before they go to bed, mom will give them some food, because by the time you're going to eat Seder Shabbos, Befrat Shabbos after Yom Tov, when you can't start preparing till it's after Yom Tov, and Seder Shabbos by its very nature will be late, so probably we'll give the kids food. Which food will we give them? The food that you're cooking, the L'Kovid Yom Tov. And you could give them some of that food, mamish, a few minutes before the Shkia. That is when they're going to be hungry. That is when people will say, Toyameu Chaim Zahu. So why didn't we rely on that heter 1,000 years ago or 200 years ago in Europe or in the East? Because people were poor and people couldn't afford it. And if you ate Sudas Yom Tov, then shut up and wait patiently till you're going to eat Sudas Shabbos. They didn't have so much food. And it was also a disciplinarian world, and wasn't an open liberal world like it is today. And if a kid asked for food between one meal and the other, they probably slapped him in the face and they told him, wait patiently till the next Suda. So I wasn't around, but that is my guess. And therefore I think on one hand, it's very unreasonable to assume that guests might show up, and therefore what you're cooking for Shabbos, you're going to offer your guests on Yom Tov. No, that's unreasonable. Didn't happen to me in 46 years, probably didn't happen to any of you either. But on the other hand, Ma'asem B'chol Yom, you prepare food for Shabbos, whether it's an Erev Shabbos in the weekday, whether it's Yom Tov, and some of that food you will eat Yom Tov afternoon, and therefore it is defined as Oyechel Nefesh. And that is why my opinion is this year, just like any previous year, go ahead, do your Erev Tavshilin. It's a kosher Erev Tavshilin, totally reliable for the three different reasons I explained, primarily reason number 3. So we discussed the mitzvah of Erev Tavshilin, which is relevant because this year we will be making Erev Tavshilin, and I specifically focused on Erev Tavshilin in the days of the coronavirus.